Okay, let me make sure I got this camera. All right, it looks good. Okay, hello everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, and welcome to today's I Love Jeet Kune broadcast. This is broadcast number, let me make sure, number 13, I think it is, lucky 13. And this is the one about something that I've taken to call in the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune. All right, so we'll get things started. For my good friend, here's the look at the t-shirt. Respond like an echo, adapt like a shadow, strike like an arrow. It's a custom made because I know that gosh, I forget my friend's name, but I have there's a guy who's always on the broadcast, and he's always wondering about my t-shirts. This one's custom made for me by a guy named Kevin Porter, who used to be a student of mine, and so you won't be able to find this one on the market. Right. Today, so we'll do the usual. We'll talk about the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune. I made a huge mistake in last week's broadcast, right? Because I tried to cover too much stuff last week, and it's a common mistake amongst Jeet Kune instructors, I think, from a certain era, because there are, there's so much material in this thing called Jeet Kune, and the people on the members of the I Love Jeet Kune group, the group of Jeet Kune instructors, the people with whom I associate, my diehard students, none of us are regular people. We're people who are committed to this ideal, and we stick to it. Most people in the world have what I call stick-to-itiveness, and so there's so much material. And sometimes as instructors, if we're not doing a lot of stuff, we feel as if we're holding back from our students. And so last week I kind of made that error, and I tried to cover like 3 or 4 things. I'm going to slow it down today, and we'll stick to just this one concept, right? The 4 tenets of Jeet Kune. There are 2 things that this brings to mind for me. One is there's a video that I shot a long time ago. I never released it, but it was called "The Use of Frameworks and Proprietary Language in Jeet Kune." And in there, I was just describing to people how frameworks is a thing it's a term which is used to describe how you arrange stuff, the way that you structure your material for teaching, for dissemination in any form. And I think it's almost a psychological term, right? And to me, it's just amazing that there are so many frameworks in Jeet Kune. And then the other thing that the guy who I learned this from is a guy named Brendan Burchard. And the other thing that Brendan mentioned when talking about frameworks was the use of proprietary language. And so in that video, I was recounting that maybe it's just me, but I don't recall in my study of martial art, other than Jeet Kune, the use of concepts or ideas such as the 4 ranges of combat, the 5 methods of defense or counter offense, the 5 ways of attack, and stuff like that. Some of that I know has come from Sifu Asano. A lot of it has come from Bruce Lee. Actually, that's something that we're going to talk about right now, because this thing, the 4 tenets. Let's see. Anybody who is watching online, tell me if you've ever heard of the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune. I know I sent out the preview, so people already know what it is that I'm talking about. But tell me if you've ever heard of it being referred to as the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune Do. That's what I thought, right? Okay, so because it's pretty much a term that I made up, right? But it was in order to give a name to something, right? So my understanding from my senior Cass Magda is that the 4 tenets. Number 1, actually, let me just read you the full sign. And actually, if you guys want to take a look at it, it is in. Wait. I found it earlier today, so I should have it close at hand. So it's in the Jeet Kune Do Art and Philosophy book, and so it's right here. How do I get this done? Right here in towards the end pages, right? So you guys are familiar with man, I can't get this camera to work, right? You guys are familiar with it. So what the sign says is the truth in combat is different for each individual in this style. And then it lists the four tenets. Tenet number 1, research your own experience for the truth. Tenet number 2, absorb what is useful. Number 3, reject what is useless. And number 4, add what is specifically your own. Right? So my understanding from Cass is that these are actually Dan Inosanto's creation and not Bruce Lee's. Now, I haven't been able to verify that with Sifu Dan. I trust Cass's knowledge and information, but I personally haven't been able to verify it with Sifu Dan, so I'll hold off until I do. Right? Again, when I was telling those of you who are just coming in, what I talked about a few minutes ago was trying to stick to just pretty much one point in today's broadcast. If any of you are familiar, there's a guy who has become relatively popular on the YouTube in the past couple of years. I think he's a clinical psychologist, and he's a professor of psychology at what's it called? University of Toronto, right? So it's a guy named Jordan Peterson, and he's pretty well known on the YouTube now. And so he a lot of his videos are like an hour or more long. And so what I've noticed is that there are people who take his videos and then they'll chop them up into more bite-sized pieces of information. And okay, Kurt's telling me that he's heard the phrase before. Which phrase is that, Kurt? Just type it in. I think I can see it on this side. You know what? Yeah. Okay, just go ahead and type it in when you're ready, Kurt. So to get back to what I was saying, it's kind of like they do with the Joe Rogan podcast, because that thing goes on. Sometimes it's an hour and a half, sometimes it's 2.5 hours, sometimes it's 3 hours long, and then there are people who will take certain snippets of it and put it into more easily digestible pieces, right? So sticking to one thing, because as Bruce Lee said to Dan Inosanto, if knowledge of Jeet Kune Do is power, then let's pass it on discriminately, right? So let's get to the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune Do. We're going to go step by step, which, by the way, is exactly how we have structured the teaching in the I Love Jeet Kune Do Quick Skills series, right? It's step by step, point by point, so that rather than overwhelming people with a ton of material, it's given to you in bite-sized pieces where you can digest it easily, and then you can. Okay, I get it, Kurt. Keep what is useful, reject what is not. Okay, all right. So, Kurt, by the time I'm done with you today, anybody that you hear, what's a nice word to use? Anybody that you come across bastardizing, right, the proprietary language that we have in Jeet Kune Do, you'll be able to fix them, right? Okay, so we're gonna get into that. Thanks for reminding me, right? And remember, guys, you can just go to I Love Jeet Kune Do right? And you'll see all the information on the Quick Skills series right there. So, 4 tenets of Jeet Kune. Number 1, research your own experience for the truth. I think that it's quite possible that a good example of this might be Bruce Lee's post-fight analysis, as I call it, of his encounter with Wong Jack Man, right? In which it's reported that he changed a lot of his approach, including his approach to stamina and conditioning, and also his technical approach, right? Instead of focusing that much on the Wing Chun, he sought to expand his personal arsenal of techniques, right? So research your own experience for the truth, right? It lends to the answer to this. You know how people have this discussion online about how Bruce Lee would do in the UFC or what have you? What people have to realize is that Bruce Lee was a martial arts pragmatist. And so if he decided that he was going to get himself involved in something like MMA competition in the UFC or whatever, you can be sure that Bruce Lee would train in a way that would give him the tools needed to compete in such a venture. Right? So, research your own experience for the truth. What's interesting about that, if you do a Google search for it, you will see in the image section, you will see images of the quotes being attributed to Dan Inosanto, but then you'll see it being attributed to Bruce Lee also. What's interesting is that if you scroll down, research your own experience, right, then a whole bunch of references to business show up, and I'll touch on that before we're finished, right? Okay, so Kurt, this is partially for you. This tenet number 2 is absorb what is useful, not keep what is useful, and certainly not what a lot of people talk about, adapt what is useful. When you find something that makes sense to you, you kind of want to learn as much about it as you do, right? You want to have a deep understanding of it. So raise your hands figuratively if you think that having a cursory knowledge, having a surface knowledge of something leads to in-depth knowledge of it. That's not what absorption is. Right? Synonyms for, let's see, if I made a note of it, I think. Synonyms for absorb are take in, assimilate, soak up, right? As opposed to synonyms for adapt, which are alter, modify, or change. So it's not about adapting what is useful or even adopting what is useful. It's about absorbing. You cannot dabble in a thing if you're seeking to absorb it. So, for example, I remember back in the 80s when I would go out to California to spend time with Sifu Inosanto. He was already a Muay Thai instructor with Ajahn Chai, but he was currently taking classes at a place called the Muay Thai Academy, right? And so anybody who knows about Sifu Dan, he's like a perfect example of absorb what is useful, because he doesn't, anything that he gets into, he gets deep into it. So, for example, in Indonesian Pencak Silat, right? To the best of my knowledge, this is the way it went. It started with a guy named John De Jong, right? And so John De Jong and Steven Plink. And then there was Nick Mustafa, but Nick was Malaysian Bersilat, I believe, not Indonesian Pencak Silat, right? Then there was Eddie Jaffrey, Suryadi Jaffrey. Then there was Paul de Tours. I mean, and I think by the time he was done, he had trained with Pendekar Paul, with Pak Vic, and also with I forget the third brother, right? But the Tours brothers. He also trained with Herman Suwanda in Pencak Silat. So that's like 4 or 5 people for Pencak Silat. in Wing Chun in order to further his understanding of something that he was introduced to by Bruce Lee. Sifu Dan has trained with, there was like, I think it's like 8 or 9 Wing Chun people. So there's Francis Fong, there's Hawkins Chung. I think there was also a little bit of time with William Chung. There's definitely time with Mo Yet, right? And there's more, right? Likewise, in Filipino martial arts, everybody knows that Sifu Dan has trained with over 30 different instructors in Filipino martial art. That's how you get to the level of absorption. You have to really, really invest some time and energy in the thing and not just do it on a surface level. Okay, so let's move on to reject what is useless. So again, Kurt, reject what is useless. This is the one that a lot of people call discard what is useless or reject what is not or what have you. And I think that sometimes a lot of people like to jump on this one because it makes you sound kind of cool when you can be the one who is rejecting this or rejecting that. You know, so if somebody's like, oh yeah, you know, I reject kung fu, you know, because or traditional kung fu or traditional karate or what have you, because that stuff is useless and whatever. I don't know. I think you got to be really, really careful with this thing called rejection, simply because you got to spend the time first in order, and anybody who thinks that there's nothing to be gained from training in a traditional karate system or in a traditional kung fu system, I'm not saying that I personally would spend the rest of my life in that. I have found the martial art method that I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. But to just summarily reject something when you have no experience of it, I think that's really what I'm trying to say. Just because maybe people around you are doing that, right? I just thought of a real world example of that, but I'm not going to touch on it because I could get myself in trouble. All right. So you should spend a lot of time with something before you reject it. And rejecting might not mean to completely discard it. Rejecting it might mean that you adapt it. You see? So you see how I got that? Right? So absorb what is useful is not about adopting or adapting. But reject what is useless might mean that you modify it, that you adapt it. You see, so there might be certain aspects. Let's take Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So there's an aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu which is sport competition. People who are training in self-defense are not interested necessarily in that sport competition. So they might have to reject a particular part of or a particular approach to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or adapt it to suit their self-defense purposes. You see what I mean? All right. Okay. So we'll move on to number 4. Add what is specifically your own. And so, Kurt, again, there's going to be a test at the end of this broadcast to make sure that you got these 4 things down. Right. So add what is specifically your own. But this is something that could cover a wide spectrum of things because individuality is so varied. You might add what is specifically your own because of particular attributes that you possess, certain, maybe particular physical qualities that you possess. Or you add in what is specifically your own might be because of specific physical limitations that you might have, right? This is actually related to another well-known Bruce Lee saying about man, the creative individual, which we'll probably cover. Maybe we'll cover that in next week's broadcast, or we'll cover it at a future date, right? I'll be a little bit philosophical with you now, right? So we're all human beings on planet Earth, which means that we have a lot in common, right? Just based on that fact. But none of us have for example, the same fingerprint patterns. So that makes us unique individuals, even though as human beings, we have a whole lot in common. So we're all unique and different and the same and have things in common at the same time, right? Which is a little bit complex. It is because each of us has a job to do while we're spending time and taking up space and breathing air on the planet, right? Adding what is specifically your own requires that you develop yourself to the utmost of your ability so that then your unique contribution is as impactful as it can be. Does that make sense? All right. So that's the breakdown of the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune. So Kurt, here's the test. I'm kidding. All right. So tenet number 1, research your own experience for the truth. Tenet number 2, absorb what is useful. Tenet number 3, reject what is useless. And tenet number 4, add what is specifically your own. So that's today's topic. So we'll start wrapping up, and I'll talk to you about a Jeet Kune thing that I like. Actually, it is quite related to today's topic, because back when I was studying business and marketing with the Glazer Kennedy Insider Circle, I was actually interviewed by Bill Glazer, and I told him that very early on in my time with them, the thing that convinced me to stick with them was because I realized that they were using Jeet Kune principles and Jeet Kune concepts in what they were teaching, right? So I'll give you my quick breakdown on the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune as applied to business and marketing, right? So rule number 1 let's call it rule number 1 in business, is to do your market research, right? See, if there are stories of people who developed a product, wrote a book, and then discovered on the back end that there was no market for the product or for the book, right? And so you end up with 1,000 copies of a book in your garage because there's nobody interested in buying it. So you want to do your market research first to make sure that when you launch, there are people interested in your product, right, or in your business. Number 2, so the Jeet Kune tenet is absorb what is useful. Sometimes in business, you come, and we've talked about this before on other broadcasts, I'm pretty sure. Sometimes in business, you come across something which in an industry different from yours. So for example, the most common one that we reference is the drive-through. The drive-through is seen in banking. The drive-through is seen in pharmaceuticals, right? And the drive-through is seen in fast food. These are three different industries, but all making use of one particular concept. Let's call it, right? Okay. Rule number 3, reject what is useless. Again, self-explanatory, but just remember to be careful not to reject too soon. And then rule number 4, add what is specifically your own. Now this is the best one, because in business and marketing, there's a thing called the unique sales proposition or sales position, right? The USP. That is what is specifically your own. So think of it this way. If you're in a business, you have to be able to answer, why should your prospective client, your prospective customer, do business with you versus doing business with any of your competitors, right, in your area, right, or even online, or maybe even versus doing nothing at all. See, I'll tell you, a master of this add what is specifically your own, which equates to knowing who you are and what it is that you have to bring, is Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee knew what he was bringing into the market, And that's why he was able to charge 1960s, 1970s, $250 an hour, right? Which is the equivalent, I checked it, that's the equivalent of $1,700 an hour in 2018 dollars, right? Well, that's pretty impressive. I mean, because I think maybe in the legal field, right, people who charge $1,700 an hour, they got to be, I'm pretty sure, they got to be in the top. So Bruce Lee knew what it meant to have a unique positioning in the market, right? He also, of course, applied another principle, which is market to the affluent, right? Okay. And just so you know, that $1,700 an hour, that's not the type of thing that you would have to pay for the quick skill series, all right? Okay, now, a quick thing that I hate, and then we'll wrap this up. I'll take a look at your comments and see if I can answer something before we sign off. Quick thing that I hate is when people, I think they're trying to be hip, right? Like we were talking about earlier, they're trying to be cool. And so people bring up a thing about original Jeet Kune Do versus Jeet Kune Do concepts. And so when I hear that, I go, geez, man, you're only 3 decades late to the party, right? That argument came up in like the summer of 86 or 88 or something from what I remember, right? So when somebody, tries to engage me in this stuff, oh, so you're really Jeet Kune Do concepts. You're not like true Jeet Kune Do. It's like, thank you for your opinion and your feedback and move on, right? Because there is no sense in going through that again. Actually, there is sense in going through it. And one day I will dedicate one of the broadcasts to just debunking that whole story, right? Okay, so that's it for today's broadcast. Let me see if I can take a look on the laptop at if I can read them, any comments that might have come in. Kurt, thank you, right? Feel free, Kurt, to get in touch with me anytime, and I can see what you're doing. Okay, so let's see. Okay, not much anything here for me to comment on, right? But you guys know how to get in touch with me. So anytime that you feel like it, feel free to reach out, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can. So this is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off for the I Love Jeet Kune Do broadcast. Be sure to check out the Quick Skills series at ilovejeetkunዶ.com. And we'll be back at 3 p.m. I had to do some last minute stuff for a trip that I'm taking. And so we'll be back at 3 p.m. next Wednesday. Same JKD time, same JKD channel. All right, you guys take care. Have a good one.